Hello and welcome to this week's 120 Dublin Stories with Santa Rita and the Little Museum of Dublin. This week we are going to be speaking with my colleague and founder of the Little Museum, Trevor White. So this Friday, the 17th of September, is actually the museum's 10th birthday. So it seemed like a lovely opportunity and excuse to sit down and just to reflect on some of the key events of the last decade. So Trevor, thank you so much for taking the time.
Great pleasure.
Well, okay, I have a million things I want to talk about. So just to get into it, bring me back to day one, bring me back to the idea and tell me a little bit about the founding story of the Little Museum.
Grand. I was pottering around really. I used to be in the magazine business and I sold a magazine in 2008. And then I went off and met the love of my life, and we had a son, Benjamin. And one day, in the manner of all new dads, I concocted an excuse to get out of the house and to meet a friend for a pint in a pub down the road, the Swan Lounge. The friend was Killian Fennell, is Killian Fennell, he's a dear friend of mine. And we fell into conversation with a young Australian at the bar. And we bought him a pint, and it was a very pleasant experience. Killian and I argued about the best things to see in Dublin. And at the end of the drink, we both had to head off. And standing outside the pub, we sort of looked at each other and said, that was a very positive experience. And, an Australian visitor had got this very warm welcome to Dublin. Some locals had bought him a pint, and we'd had a very pleasant experience as well. He was a very nice fellow. Weirdly enough, he was, as I recall, he was an Australian who worked in a gold mine in Egypt, of all things. Yeah, and he'd heard that Ireland was a friendly place. So he decided he had a few days off, and it wasn't too far away, so he decided to come to Ireland. And again, we were quite impressed by that, the fact that our reputation for friendliness, that came before us. So we went home, and perhaps fueled by the giddiness of that pint, I decided that evening that, well, actually what happened is I went home and Susan was asleep. And I woke her up and I announced, darling, we're going to make Dublin the friendliest place in the world. We're going to create a greeter program. We're going to welcome visitors from all over the world. And we're going to get loads of volunteers to welcome visitors to Dublin. And I'm not sure if these were her exact words, but in the foundation myth, they have become her exact words. She turned over, wiped the sleep from her eyes and said, did you remember to put the bins out? So inspired by that, very positive response to my daft idea, the following morning I contacted Fáilte Ireland and Dublin City Council to see whether they would be willing to participate in the creation of a greeter programme, which would enable Dubliners to welcome visitors to the city. And to their great credit, both Dublin City Council and Fáilte Ireland recognised the value of the idea immediately. I'm particularly grateful, and I'm happy to pay tribute to them here, to two men in particular, Michael Stubbs and Declan Wallace in Dublin City Council, who were instrumental really in the development of the idea, and also to John Concannon, who went on to great things, who was in Fáilte Ireland at the time, and three visionary people, and I was very, very lucky to come into contact with the three of them early in the project. So anyway, we developed the idea, and the possibility emerged of getting into this building on St. Stephen's Green, 15 St. Stephen's Green, this beautiful Georgian townhouse. And for a while, it looked like we were going to go into the basement of this empty building. And I look back now with some embarrassment at my impudence. But at some point in the conversation, I said to Dublin City Council, well, to be honest, we wouldn't be happy with the basement. when you bring visitors to your house, to your home, you don't bring them to the basement, you bring them to the good room, as we say in Ireland. And to be fair, they recognized that was a good idea. So we saw this extraordinary first floor of this building, this handsome townhouse built in the 1770s here on St. Stephen's Green. And I suppose very quickly recognized that there was an opportunity to create something more than this greeter program, that in fact we might create a suite of rooms that showcases the history and the heritage of Dublin, a place in which these meetings with visitors might be hosted. And very quickly that suite of rooms became a museum, at least in my imagination. And then we cut to another pub a few days later. And this time I'm with my dear friend, Simon O'Connor. And Simon had worked with me in the magazine previously as a graphic designer. And he's a hugely capable person and very charismatic and gifted. And I announced to Simon, when we met, that we were going to open a museum, and that he was going to be the curator, and that I was going to be the director. And naturally, he sighed, threw his eyes to heaven, and three pints later, I was the director and he was the curator. And that's a kind of a short version of how it happened. A few weeks later, we went on the radio. We made an appeal for volunteers for the greeter program, which became City of 1,000 Welcomes. And we also made an appeal for artifacts on the Marion Finucane radio show. And we were inundated with responses. Our hope was that we might get 1,000 artifacts within 3 or 4 months, I think it was. And we ended up getting that many within a couple of weeks. And we recognized, I suppose, at that point that we had an obligation to the idea itself, really to create something that Dubliners could be proud of, a true people's museum. So we set it up as a non-profit museum, and we opened the doors on Culture Night exactly 10 years ago.
Yeah, which brings us to where we are today. And like a couple of phrases that we regularly talk about, and we have regularly talked about over the bones of the last decade, are these ideas of growing civic pride and enabling kids to leave the museum walking that little bit taller. Can you just unpack what we mean by that?
Sure. So civic pride, very broadly, is the amount of affection that a place has for itself. And Dublin, of course, has had a rather complex history with the rest of this country, and indeed with itself. And I was very mindful. Remember, this is 2011. Ireland is in the loving arms of the IMF. It's a difficult moment in the history of the city. There's no doubt about it. We're in the height of a recession. Civic pride is pretty low. I think it has to be said. And frankly, the fact that Dublin didn't even have a city museum, almost alone among European capitals, was itself evidence of this lack of civic pride. And I suppose I was very animated by this principle that civic pride is actually a good thing. And I suppose I was also mindful of my own gratitude to Dublin. I grew up in the city, and I went away like many of my generation. I left school in 1990, and I came back with a kind of a determination to I suppose to contribute something to Irish society. And I did that initially within the magazine. And then I sort of felt that as I say, that the moment was right for the museum. And I started reading more about civic pride and discovered, for example, that communities with higher levels of attachment, of social attachments, inevitably emerge quicker from recessions. In other words, there's a very strong economic case for developing civic pride. And I felt that the museum and the City of 1,000 Welcomes could become a focus a focal point for civic pride within the city. And specifically, I felt that the education program, I was very mindful of our obligation really to the generations succeeding us. And I felt there was an opportunity to really I suppose, to inspire or to encourage a new generation of civic-minded leaders within our education program. And with the help of Simon and a really fantastic team of people, we developed the education program, and with the support of various bodies, both state bodies, but also corporates, local corporates who recognize the value of the work as well. And we built the education program. And today it's really at the heart of what we're doing. It's the thing, I suppose, I would never say this in public, of course, don't quote me, but to my mind, it is really at the core of what we do. And it's probably my favorite thing, to see kids walk in, often a little, not jaded, but a little weary, shall we say, and a little cynical, as kids are inclined to be. And then walking out an hour or an hour and a half later, walking that little bit taller. And these things are notoriously difficult to measure. It's not easy to quantify the impact of a single museum visit. But as you know, Sarah, we see it all the time in those slightly, those kids walking slightly taller. And as I say, it's one of my favorite parts of the job.
Which can be our little secret, but moving on from that, a lot of people who've engaged with this 120 Dublin Stories series have been friends and members of the museum who have been our community over the last decade. And I guess for many of them who would have been attending our events, our lectures, our conference, or our concerts, our events over the years, when you think back on that side of the museum, I wonder what lectures or what events, or if there's a couple of key moments that stand out in your mind.
Sure. So you mentioned the lecture program. I think that was instrumental really in terms of developing a bond with the local community, and our membership program, which was really a function, I suppose, of the lectures, or rather the other way around, I suppose. We have hosted some just gobsmacking events downstairs. I'm thinking of people like Patrick Gagan talking about the trial of Robert Emmet in a room, the 120 people. You could hear the pin drop. This really poignant, very dramatic retelling of the last days of Robert Emmet's life. I'm thinking of Adrian Hardiman, who's now passed away, sadly, of course, the Supreme Court judge, talking about James Joyce. I'm thinking of the exhibition that we did around Brendan Bracken, which is a particular highlight, I have to say, for me personally. I've always been interested in the story of Bracken, who many of our viewers will know was Churchill's right-hand man. He was a parvenu. He was an Irishman who sort of wormed his way into the very heart of the British establishment, eventually went on to publish the Financial Times. He was Winston Churchill's parliamentary private secretary, Tory MP. He was an extremely mercurial figure who would be horrified to know that we're remembering him here in a museum of Dublin. But he was a Dubliner, albeit a very awkward Dubliner. And, to be able to tell his story as we did on the eve of the Brexit referendum, to have Jonathan Aitken, a former British cabinet minister, come over and launch that event, to work with Charles Lycett, who's one of my heroes, a great historian and the obituarist, and a man of many hats indeed. But to work with Charles on curating that exhibition with the support of the Financial Times, the paper that Bracken himself built, that was a very special moment in the journey, I have to say.
the timing of that, I would love to say we did it on purpose. But, and when you're talking about storytelling, I can't not ask. Like, obviously, we've spent the bones of the last 10 years looking at storytelling, tour guiding, creating these moments that are important. And I guess, what's my question? Would you tell us a little bit about the 3 H's and kind of the key messages we've learned about storytelling in the last while?
So Simon and I, because we had no experience in the museum business, we were, I hope Simon doesn't mind me describing us as foolish virgins, but there's an element of truth in that, certainly. We were able to bring a fresh perspective, I suppose, to the business of running a museum. And we recognized early on that, you know, there's a huge amount of academic research around museology, and I would defer to our colleagues in the community on any technical questions any day of the week. But in terms of the practicality of running the museum, we recognized that there were really only 3 things that were at the heart of the work, and they all start, as you say, with H. The first is history, which is our subject itself, the history of Dublin, and specifically a kind of a bottom-up approach to history. We're less interested in the great events and the great men and women of history than we are in social and cultural experience. The history, you know, the lived experience of people in the city. So that's our subject, history. Hospitality is central to our, I suppose, our philosophy is probably too grand a word for it, but it's certainly central to what we do here. And that's central for a couple of reasons. A, because people are more receptive to information when they're made to feel welcome, in exactly the same way that when you walk into a shop, if the shop assistant is pleasant and friendly, I think you're probably more likely to spend money there. And B, because hospitality is something that the Irish are synonymous with. And we felt that we had an obligation, if we were going to personify the Irish character and Irish heritage, that we had a particular obligation to be very hospitable. So as I say, hospitality is very much at the heart of what we do. And then the third H is humor. And humor, you might easily say, you might also say performance. Unfortunately, it doesn't start with a H. But you might also say conversation. And what I'm talking about really when I say humor is, I mean the kind of the salty humor of Dublin itself, the gift, the gab, the facility with conversation that so many Dubliners have and which we're renowned for internationally. And we felt, again, that there was an opportunity for the museum to personify that tradition of good conversation. And that's why we decided very early on to make the guided tours a kind of a key part of the visitor experience within the museum, and really to emphasize that kind of theatricality that is again part and parcel of the experience of having a conversation with many Dubliners. I suppose I'm very informed by theatre as well. I'm very inspired by theatre. I studied theatre in college 1,000 years ago, and I remain inspired by great theatre makers, people like Louise Lowe, who's done such extraordinary work here in Dublin. People like Selena Cartmel, the director of the Gate Theatre, who are visionary makers of theatre, and that's reflected, I suppose, in the visitor experience here in the museum today. I was thrilled yesterday to get up at 6 a.m. as I invariably do, and turn to TripAdvisor and to see the first review on yesterday morning described the museum as part museum, part Paris Fashion Week, with the best dressed guides you'll ever meet. I was really thrilled to see that, because again, it speaks to that kind of emphasis on theatricality with our guides and their dicky bows and their lovely hats and so on. So that's a rather long-winded answer to your question, sorry.
No, absolutely. And I think it is very much at the heart of the experience. And I think the fact that we're able to return to giving guided tours in, gosh, less than a week's time after the last year and a half is really quite heartening. But one project that when I was thinking about this conversation, one project I kind of felt like I had to ask you about was Alfie. Like I think kind of objectively, if we take a step back and look at it as an experience, through the Alfie Byrne project, we created an exhibition. You went on to publish a book on the subject, but you also did something which I don't think we had done up until that point, which was start to program talks and events outside the walls of the museum and to bring ourselves out into the community and to really, I guess, reinforce the importance of being part of a wider community. I kind of, without being too prescriptive on my question, I wonder, when you think of the Alfie project, what are the key memories or kind of points of pride that come to your mind?
So the first thing I have to do is acknowledge the extraordinary generosity of the Byrne family. Alfie Byrne's, his son, his last living son, Paddy Byrne, came to us shortly after the museum opened. And Paddy was then a very sprightly 92-year-old. Today he's in his late 90s and still in great shape. I'm pleased to say. And Paddy very kindly offered a large collection of material relating to his father's political career. Alfie Byrne was, as you know, the longest serving Lord Mayor in the history of the post. He was the only man in Irish history who served as a TD, an MP, a senator, a councillor, and Lord Mayor of Dublin. He was a unique figure in the political, but also in the cultural history of this city. He was hugely admired by tens of thousands of people, not simply in Dublin, but all over the country. So for us to have this access to his archive was a great privilege, and we worked with Paddy to, first of all, to catalogue the archive which took about 18 months, and then, as you say, we created the exhibition within the museum. And as I'm inclined to do, I got a little bit obsessed with the story of Alfie and ended up writing his biography, which Penguin published. And indeed, as you say, we brought the story of Alfie Byrne to community centres really all over Ireland. In fact, I ended up going to many places outside Dublin, to speaking with active retirement groups, to speaking with going to old people's homes, going to schools, and really to tell the story of this remarkable political figure. And it was just such pleasure to be able to do that. He was a very complex figure, incidentally, I should say, Alfie Byrne. He wasn't a saint by any measure, but he is a remarkable figure in the history of this country. And as I say, we felt lucky to be able to tell that story.
And talking of telling stories, I wonder, what are the other couple of projects that particularly sit in your mind? Like, I'm thinking the Mary Mares project or the Christy Brown archive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so as you know, Sarah, and you in particular know, because you've been instrumental in building this business, we have been extremely lucky to enjoy the support of the state, and indeed of many corporates, local companies who recognise the value of the work. And the Christy Brown archive came up for sale in London, and this remarkable figure, this artist and writer who was so brilliantly portrayed by Daniel Day-Lewis in My Left Foot, someone who was again, like Alfie Byrne, a hugely important figure in the cultural life of Dublin as well. And the estimate for the archive was frankly way outside our budget. Really, we'd no budget really at all to acquire artifacts, and I was a little sore about it, if I'm honest. I just thought, this is absurd. This archive shouldn't be leaving Ireland. This man is a Dubliner. We have an obligation to try and keep this here in Dublin. So again, as I went in a fagary, as we say, I wrote a letter to the Irish Times, simply noting that the archive was coming up for sale, and my very wise wife Susan said, "Don't be daft. What are you doing that for? No one, no one's going to respond." The RTE News got on, and they said, "Would you like to do an interview on the 6-1 News about it this evening?" And again, my very wise wife Susan said, "Are you sure you want to do that?" And the following morning, which was the day of the auction, I woke up early again, and to find an email that had been written by a gentleman. I don't know whether we should say his name, Diarmuid Morrissey. Are we allowed to say Diarmuid's name? From Direct Medical. And Diarmuid very kindly wrote. He said, "I saw you on the news, and look, I'll give half if you can raise the other half, and we'll try and buy this thing at auction." So I went to the Department of Culture, and immediately got a response from them. They said, "Well, look, we'll have a go at auction." And to our delight, we managed to secure the archive in conjunction with the National Library of Ireland later that day at auction in London. And again, to be able to tell that story here in the museum was a hugely important moment. And then, as you know, we had the pleasure of taking it to New York, and where we exhibited there as well. So yeah, that was a really important moment in the life of the institution, and it showed us, I suppose, the potential for the work that we're doing here. But it also demonstrated the enormous goodwill and generosity, both of the Irish people and of the state itself.
Yeah, and it kind of, I think, reflecting on that day in the years since, it kind of helped me to see that we were actually gaining our place in the kind of official museum landscape of the city. And I guess then when talking about that kind of idea, there was an article in the Irish Times last weekend when you reflected on kind of the 10 lessons of running a museum over 10 years. And I think I'm kind of curious if you had to actually, and this is probably a really unfair question to put you on the spot with, but if you had to pare it down and to identify the one lesson you've learned in the last decade, what would that be?
A museum does not build itself. You can come up with your daft idea to open a museum, but unless you're surrounded by capable people and generous people, people who are willing to give time and money to support you, then you're nowhere. It's just a daft idea. And I was just particularly lucky. I think our timing was very fortuitous. I've mentioned Simon, but I think I'm going to embarrass you now. I think your own role absolutely crucial, Sarah. You came in very early on. Again, you had no experience running a museum, it has to be said, and you did an absolutely extraordinary job. You built the commercial side of the business, but also managing the team and really taking us from very, very early days to the position that we're in today. And I think you should be so proud of your own contribution, because you've just been brilliant. But it's not just you and Simon and me. As you know, there's a huge number of people. There's a huge team of volunteers, of tour guides, of patrons. Again, and it's everybody from Dublin City Council, which owns the building that we occupy, the Department of Culture, which supports our work annually, to corporations, to companies, again, too numerous to mention, to be honest, who've recognized the value of the work and said, yeah, this is probably a good thing, and it's a good association for us, and let's give it a go. But the managing of those relationships is really, it's at the core of what you do, and you do such a brilliant job at it. And yeah, I'm very proud to be working with you.
Very much likewise. It's yeah, we've such a privilege in the people that we get the opportunity to work with every day. It is nothing short of a privilege. That is definitely the word. But yeah, as you said, none of us came from museums, and it's interesting to see how that journey has unfolded, which I guess kind of brings us to 10 years, which naturally I have to, for someone who imagined and daydreamed this idea to begin with, I'm going to now force you to do that 10 years into the future. What do you hope a visit to the Little Museum looks like 10 years from
now? I hope it's theatrical. I hope it's entertaining. I hope it's surprising. I hope that people who don't like museums love the experience of going to the Little Museum. I hope it's universally accessible. As you know, it's a project that we've spent a huge amount of time on in recent years, and we remain optimistic about that. I hope that we're able to tell stories like that of Mary Merritt you mentioned a moment ago. And again, just maybe for some of our viewers who don't know about Mary, Mary spent 14 years in Hyde Park Magdalen Laundry in Drumcondra. She survived that experience. She went on to build an extraordinary life. And 50 years later, she reflected on her own life story and in an installation here in the museum in 2018. And it was a really powerful piece of theatre, really. I suppose it marries theatre and museum and art, as you might call it, an installation, I suppose. But anyway, it was a kind of 15-minute experience in which you walk into a dark room, one person at a time, and come out 15 minutes later feeling like you know this woman intimately. And it's, again, you feel extremely privileged to have been a participant in that experience, and those are the kind of stories that I'd like to tell. That's the kind of way I'd like to tell them as well, in that theatrical way. And I hope that I really hope that in 10 years' time that the museum, frankly, if it's in the kind of shape that it's in today, I'll be super proud of the work that you and the rest of my successors are doing in 10 years' time, because we are, notwithstanding the wretched pandemic, the museum is in remarkably good shape after 10 years. And that's thanks to as we've said, to the extraordinary support that we've enjoyed, both from colleagues and patrons and the Irish public, which have got behind the work to such a huge extent. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then, I guess, as kind of a closing thought or a closing question, you've mentioned that. As far as lessons go, a museum doesn't build itself, that you need people, you need a community, you need, a determination collectively to make it happen. But then you've also said you need the daft idea or the concept or the idea to start off with. If you were setting up again, I'm kind of thinking this for the person who's watching this with the daft idea in the back of their head that they'd love to see as a reality. If you were to go back and talk to yourself on day one, what one piece of advice would you give?
You have to be very tenacious. I mean, that's really, as you know, it's my one gift. I am a very tenacious person, and I have a good idea once every 10 years. I suppose unlike most people, I'm inclined to act on the idea and not to let go. So you need that tenacity, definitely. You need an ability to ignore people who tell you not to do the job that you want to do, because there were a great many people who told us not to open the museum, and we still encounter a lot of what Yeats described as the daily spite of this unmannerly town. There is a degree of that here in Dublin. But yeah, so you need to be slightly deaf to that, and you need to be super tenacious. And you also need to surround yourself with brilliant people, and to be lucky, really lucky in terms of your timing, and a lot else besides.
Okay, well then, I guess we're kind of coming to a natural conclusion on this conversation, but I guess it's the museum being part of my life really has become one of the greatest privileges that I've had. And for that, I really do sincerely thank you and appreciate what you created that decade ago. It's made my life better. And I'm sure the same can be said for many of the other people. So I think in the next couple of days, let's celebrate a 10-year-old's birthday. I dare say there should be Rice Krispie cakes and maybe.
Yeah. Sarah, could I just say, because I neglected to thank, there's two kind of bodies of people. The first is the philanthropists who've supported us as well, the people who've recognized that actually this thing is worth supporting by actually writing checks to support the work that we're doing, and that is hugely important. We've been absolutely blessed, and I'm thinking of one particular bequest, which is not yet public, which is transformative, which we'll tell you about in greater detail, hopefully in due course. And secondly, I think it's really important that we acknowledge the role of the board as well. We're blessed to have a board chaired by Brodie Sweeney, which has been so supportive of the work that we do from the very beginning. And as you know, we're so lucky to have that really positive relationship with a group of people who are kind of not older and wiser, but certainly wiser than me, and they provide a tremendous governance, and they do it for nothing. And again, we're so lucky to have them at our back. So yeah, I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I guess that's really, we're drawing this conversation to a close, really, by saying thank you to everyone who's on this call this evening, whether you've been a friend or a member attending events over the years, you've never yet been into the museum, you've just stumbled upon this on Facebook, you are a supporter, you are an artifact donor. Collectively, we have all built this little museum, and I think it's been nice to have an opportunity to take stock. And Trevor, thank you for indulging me on that, and I guess here's to the next 10. So I think that's it for this week's 120 Dublin Stories with Santa Rita and the Little Museum. Happy birthday to the Little Museum, and we'll talk to you all soon. Bye.
Thanks, Sarah. Bye-bye.